Now, without further ado, as is our custom, you have Louis Massey's bio at your table, and I won't go on into his very lengthy accomplishments for such a young man. I just would like to say that Louis is an extraordinary young man. He's a personal friend of mine, has been for many years, and I think he's a friend of a lot of ours here. And his popularity as a politician, I think, is self-evident from the fact that he attracted, I think, the second most votes ever by a person running for public office in the state. Kelly McCutcheon, I was talking to his dad about a week ago, and not to get too partisan here since we are nonpartisan, but I will mention up in Ellijay, Louis, in case you didn't catch this from the returns, Louis was the only Democrat to take Ellijay in whatever county that is, Gilmer County? Is it Gilmer, Kelly? So he's extraordinary appeal throughout very many quarters of the state. So anyway, without further ado, Louis, welcome, and if you'd like to come on up.
Thank you very much. I would like to begin by thanking Griff Doyle for that nice introduction. And Griff, I promise not to tell Joe McCutcheon that you didn't know what county Ellijay was in. He'll be quite upset about that. As Griff mentioned to you, he and I have been friends for a long time, and I think he's doing a great job for you at the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. And of course, he was a star before he got here in his service and tenure at the Department of Community Affairs, and you're very lucky to have someone of Griff's talent and enthusiasm and dedication to help run this organization. He mentioned Kelly McCutcheon, and Kelly and I have also been friends for a long time, and Kelly's father, Joe, and my mother, Kay Ann, have been friends for probably 40 or so years, longer than they would like to admit. They were childhood friends, and so it's a great pleasure for me to be here with Kelly as well, and I know that you're glad to have him on staff too. Griff mentioned a couple of people that I wanted to mention again that have helped me both in my election as Secretary of State and as serving as Georgia Secretary of State. And the first person is Cathy Cox here, who is the Assistant Secretary of State. Most of you may know that Cathy served in the House of Representatives and was on her way to be a real leader, was already a real leader in the House when I called her in December of last year to ask her to consider to come on board with me as Assistant Secretary of State, and she has done so, and she has just done a tremendous job in helping me to be Secretary of State. We've made some very positive changes in the office, and she is someone that I think you're going to hear from again in the near future, both as a statewide candidate and as an official. And I'm just hoping that by saying these nice things about her that she won't run against me later on. Shannon Mayfield, Griff mentioned, was my campaign manager. Shannon also happens to be from Ellijay. That's Gilmer County, Griff. Shannon is also a star in his own right. He has gone back, as Griff mentioned to you, to be Chief of Staff for Pierre Howard. And he really kept me on track during the campaign, you know, especially those last 2 weeks when everybody in the state would call and say the sky's falling in and things look bad and you better get down here and do this, that, and the other. Shannon really kept us on track and did a great, great job in spearheading our efforts there. Jim King was also on our staff. Jim is a member of the Public Policy Foundation, and I think he's been to about 15 or 20 straight breakfasts, Griff. He is somebody that always shows up and attends and reports back to us about the good programs that you have. And Jim, I appreciate you being here this morning. Jim's heard me speak before, and he came anyway. So I want to recognize Mark Middleton over here on the right. Mark and I were fraternity brothers at the University of Georgia. And again, I was glad that I was able to say some nice things about Mark during the campaign, because I certainly didn't want him talking about college days during an election year. And Mark, I appreciate you being here. Mark's an attorney in DeKalb County. It's great to also be here with Congressman Bob Barr. Congressman Barr and I were co-panelists on a show with Bill Nigut several weeks ago. This was just after the election, and he and I were just talking. Neither one of us have actually seen the tape of the show, but I hope we did okay. And he does a great job representing the interest of the 7th District, and I appreciate him being here this morning. I don't plan on giving a long, boring political speech this morning. I know that all of you are happy to hear that, and thinking about that reminds me of a story I heard one time about a man who was asked to speak at a Chamber of Commerce dinner, and when he accepted the invitation to speak, he asked him how long he had on the program. and they told him he had about 15 minutes. And he got up, and as you know, the politician was sometime too, he got kind of long-winded and went on for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Finally, almost an hour had elapsed since the speech began. Well, the crowd, as you can imagine, was growing very, very restless. Finally, the man who had introduced the speaker picked up a gavel there on the front podium and threw it at him. Well, it missed him completely, but it went on into the front row of the audience, and it hit a poor little old lady there, and everybody rushed over to see if she was okay. And she said, "Hit me again, I can still hear him." So if I see Griff picking up anything, I know it's time to quit. It's been a real exciting time for our family since Governor Miller called me in December of last year to let me know that I would be the new Secretary of State, and we have had, of course, a very challenging year this year as we work for re-election. My wife and I have two small children. Chandler is 6, and he just started kindergarten. In fact, I was a little bit late this morning. I dropped him off, and he told me today as I dropped him off that this was his 53rd day of kindergarten. So he's keeping count, Skin, and our little girl Cameron is 4, and most of the feedback that we have gotten about serving as Secretary of State has been very positive. But I wanted to tell you about a letter that I received. Some of you that have heard me speak before have heard this story, but it was about a week before Christmas last year, actually before I'd even been sworn in as Georgia's Secretary of State. I went out to the mailbox, and it was a big stack of mail, and on top was a letter addressed to the Honorable Lois Massey. And I don't mind telling you that up to that point in my life, I had never been called the Honorable anything. And so I was real excited about it, you know, and I brought the letter into the house, and I told my wife, I said, "Now, Amy, you know, the Secretary of State in Georgia receives mail every day from school children, and they usually want to know a little bit about the history of Georgia, about the state capitol, about the state symbols." I said, "I'm sure this is my first letter like that," and so I tore it open, you know, with great anticipation, and the letter said, "Dear Mr. Massey, congratulations on becoming Georgia's new Secretary of State. We are studying civics in our 5th grade government class in Clayton County, and I need for you to write me back and let me know if there's anything lower in state government than the Secretary of State." So it took me a while to get over that one, I can tell you. I thought what I'd do this morning briefly is talk to you about some of the issues that I believe are important to each of us and to the state of Georgia as a whole. And I learned a lot about these issues as I traveled around Georgia and talked to citizens about their concerns, about their dreams and goals, about their hopes for state government and for the state of Georgia as they continue to raise their families in our great state. And I like to start my speeches by talking about education. And the reason I do that, although I certainly acknowledge that the Secretary of State in Georgia does not have anything directly to do with education, I believe that we would all agree this morning that improving the educational system is certainly one of the most important keys to the future growth and prosperity of Georgia. We would also acknowledge, I'm sure, that Georgia has had a number of problems in education for a long, long time. But I really believe that if we can continue to have some innovative, creative people in public service and in public office, that we are going to make some strides in improving our educational system. I believe that it's very positive, for instance, that we have continued to increase the teacher pay in Georgia up to the point now where we're the 2nd highest paying state in the Southeast for teacher pay. And I submit to you this morning that the only way that we're going to be able to attract and retain good qualified individuals to teach our children is by paying them what they're worth. I also think it's very positive that a lot of the improvements that are occurring in education today are occurring in our classrooms, because I know that you would agree with me that no student, no child in Georgia learns to read or write in the governor's office or the superintendent of education's office, or certainly not in the Secretary of State's office. They learn to read and write in the classrooms in Georgia. And so I think we have to continue to put our emphasis there in trying to improve what kind of instruction our students get in the classroom. I want to point out to you as well that through the state lottery, we've had $1.3 billion new dollars come into our educational system. And although money is certainly not the only answer to improving our educational system, I think that we all should be proud as Georgians that lottery proceeds are going to supplement existing educational funds and not going to replace existing educational funds. And we are the only state in the country where this is happening. Nowhere else in the United States is that occurring. And so we have almost 2 million students now in Georgia that have already been helped with the lottery proceeds, pre-kindergarten, technology in schools, and the Hope Scholarship Program. And I believe that all of these programs are going to, in the very near future, provide some very positive results in the field of education. I believe that people want us to continue along these creative, innovative solutions in the area of public school choice. I really agree with a lot of you here that we have to have a pilot project in Georgia to try to come up with a program that will work in the area of public school choice. There's been some bills introduced in the General Assembly to that effect. I'm sure that there will be again this year, and I'm hopeful that in the very near future we can have some of these pilot projects so that we can work out the kinks and find out for sure if this will improve our educational system. I believe we have to continue to improve and change the charter school laws. You know, I believe that we have to think outside the educational box. Some of you probably saw the paper this morning where the Atlanta school system have just hired a business person as the assistant superintendent. And the reason that they stated for hiring a business person was that they wanted to have someone outside the educational box. And I believe that we have to do that statewide, and if we can continue to try to come up with new ways to encourage and promote charter schools, creative, innovative ways to teach our children, I believe that we'll be better off in the long run in the area of education. The second issue I want to discuss with you briefly is economic development. Now, most of you probably realize how fast Georgia is growing. Since 1990, we have created in this state more jobs than every other state in the country except for Florida and Texas. And they both, of course, have a lot more people in them than we do. We're the fourth fastest growing state in the country. We continue to be the #1 state in the Southeast in job and income growth. Part of my duties as your Secretary of State is to incorporate all the new businesses that come into Georgia. And on average, for the last 6 months in Georgia, 2,500 new corporations have been formed every single month. So I believe that for a long time in the future, Georgia is going to continue to be a magnet for people and for businesses. And I believe that the BEST program that the General Assembly and Governor Miller championed a few years ago that gives tax incentives to companies that create jobs in depressed areas of Georgia will continue to even out the growth so that we can enjoy the prosperity that we've enjoyed here in the metro Atlanta area. I believe that people around this state would like for government to make sense in the area of economic development. What I mean by that is I believe that they would like government to try to make it convenient for people to start businesses and to create jobs. We have heard their call, and we have expanded our First Stop Business Center in the Secretary of State's office. The First Stop Business Center takes all the forms, all the phone numbers, and all the instructions that someone needs to start a business in Georgia and create jobs for our citizens, and puts all that information into one package. Now, it sounds like common sense, but it hadn't happened before. So no longer does somebody that wants to start a business in Georgia have to run around to 6 or 7 different state agencies and 2 or 3 different federal agencies to get the information that they need to start a business in Georgia. And I believe that that is the kind of role that government should play because our state is already growing so rapidly. 2,500 new corporations every month. All these new jobs are being created. We have to be, I believe, government has to be a hard-working partner with the private sector to allow these people more conveniently to set up businesses and to create jobs for our citizens. The third issue I want to mention to you briefly is welfare reform, and Griff mentioned that briefly in his report this morning. I believe that the people of Georgia would like and are ready for real welfare reform. Now, we've had 2 very unique, innovative programs in Georgia that have been successes in the last 5 to 10 years. One is the PEACH program, which is now available in every county in Georgia, that requires able-bodied welfare recipients to work and to receive job training before they receive their welfare check. And 2 years ago, we started our Work First program, which changes the entire emphasis of the welfare department in Georgia from putting people on welfare to helping them find jobs in the private sector. Now, through these 2 programs, PEACH and Work First, 72,000 Georgians have come off the welfare rolls in the last 24 months. Now, that's 72,000 people that are now working, earning a living, paying taxes back to the federal, state, and local governments, and perhaps most importantly, that's 72,000 people that are now serving as role models for their children so that we can begin the process of breaking the vicious welfare cycle. Now, we have heard the people's call for welfare reform as well, and I believe that a program that we have just implemented in the Secretary of State's office is going to help in this area. And it's the program that's going to allow us to suspend professional business licenses of parents that are not paying their child support in Georgia. Now, there are a couple of reasons that I believe this program is going to pay great dividends. Number one is pretty obvious, and that is that there are a lot of children and a lot of families in our state that are not getting the chance that they need and deserve to live productive lives because they're not receiving their court-ordered child support. But secondly, the Department of Human Resources says that 60% of all mothers on welfare in Georgia today, 60% would not be on welfare if they were just receiving their court-ordered child support. So I really believe that by the threat of suspension of business license, we are going to force many parents to meet their financial obligations to their children, and in the process, we're going to continue to move many families off the welfare rolls into self-supporting positions. Fourth area that I want to mention to you is that I believe that the people of this state would like bipartisan government. If you look at the results of the election about a month ago, you'll see that there were a lot of Democrats elected and there were a lot of Republicans elected. And I believe that most people in Georgia agree with my philosophy, and that is that we are Georgians first and we are Democrats and Republicans second. And I like to think that in Georgia we have a pretty good bipartisan working relationship. More and more now in Georgia you'll see that the parties will work together across party lines to try to find the solutions that are best for this state. And I think that's very healthy, and I really believe that that's going to continue into the next several years. Now, my last topic I want to mention to you briefly is that I believe that people in this state want efficient government. They want us to provide more services for less dollars. Now, it can be done. It's not easy, but it can be done. In our office, since Cathy and I have taken over down there, we have 18 less people than when we started in January of this year. We've already returned about $800,000 to the state treasury, money that had been appropriated for the use by the Secretary of State's office, but money that we were able to return due to increased efficiency and trying to do a better job with less people. Now, how can we do a better job with less people? Well, the first obvious answer is that we can privatize functions. And my philosophy of the Secretary of State's office is that if the private sector can come in and help us to perform any of our duties, and they can do it more efficiently and more effectively, and they can help save taxpayers money, then they are going to get that opportunity. We already have found 2 areas in our office that we've been able to turn over to the private sector, and we are working very hard to find other areas. Now, the second way that I believe we can do more with less is through better and increased use of technology. You know, government is a long way behind in the area of technology. We have started in the Secretary of State's office, for the first time in the history of this office, a worldwide web page. Because if you think about it, the Secretary of State's office is primarily an office that disseminates information. Where to register to vote, how to get licensed in a certain profession, information about the history of the state of Georgia, information about how to start a business. And there's no reason in the world that all of that information in the near future should not be available on the World Wide Web, on the Internet. And it's going to be happening very soon in the Secretary of State's office. More and more of the information that we disseminate is going to be available online and on the Internet. And I think that's going to continue to allow us to downsize and be more efficient and be better stewards of your tax money. Let me tell you that I appreciate the chance to be here with you this morning, and I really would like to continue to get input and suggestions about how to improve the Secretary of State's office. One of the first actions that we took after being sworn in January was to send a memo to all 360 employees. It's about 338 now, but it was 360 at the time, and we asked each one of them to suggest at least one way that we could do a better job of being efficient and saving taxpayers money and improving services to the people of this state. And we got some great suggestions, some that we have already implemented and others that we are working on implementing. Because I really believe with all my heart that the only way that we are going to be the best Secretary of State's office that we can be is by getting input and suggestions and criticisms and feedback from the people that use our services. And I know that a lot of you here in this room do in fact use our services. So I hope that either this morning or at any time in the future that you have suggestions for us, if you have ideas of ways that we can improve service and that save taxpayers money. I really would like to hear about them, because we are serious in the Secretary of State's office about downsizing, about being better stewards of your tax money, but also improving services. Thank you for the chance to be here with you this morning. I know Griff said we had a few minutes for question and answers. I'll be glad to try to take and answer any questions that you might have this morning. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Matthew, would you like to comment on why it takes so long for election results to come out after an election?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, and I should have mentioned that in my speech. For the first time in the history of the Secretary of State's office, we actually had election results available on our worldwide web page. So, in fact, they were available this time the night of the election. And I believe that if we can continue to do that and continue to get the results out very soon after the Tuesday when the election occurs, that we're going to be doing a lot better job than has been done in the past about getting election results out. But this particular election that took place a month ago, if you have access to the internet, you could have gotten the results from state representatives, state senators, to the statewide races and the presidential race. They were all available on the internet this time. Yes, sir.
Secretary Massey, when the voter bill was passed 3 years ago, Congress left one of the only avenues for cleaning up the list of registered voters would be for the state to use the post office's national change of address system. The last 3 years, the Secretary of State's office has not used that system, and my understanding is this year, again, they're not going to use them. My understanding is, for instance, in Fulton County, that means that there's anywhere from 45,000 ghost voters listed on the list of registered voters, which would be enough to turn elections. Can you explain why the Secretary of State's office did not use that system and doesn't intend to do it again this year?
Well, the second part of your question is not correct, but let me answer the first part first. The only time, of course, that I can answer for is from January the 5th of this year until now, which is the time I've been Secretary of State. And under the federal law, which created an opportunity for states to use NCOA, or National Change of Address, you had to be a certain distance both before and after an election. So there's no way under the federal law that we could have used it in 1996. We are considering using it for 1997, and we're talking with the federal authorities and a number of other people to make sure that it is going to be the right program for Georgia. We have some unanswered questions so far. For instance, the NCOA system has a lot of P.O. boxes. So if we match up somebody that has a P.O. box and they don't show up, if the address don't match, does that mean that person is going to be kicked out of the system? And if so, of course, that's not going to be something that we can live with. So we are working very hard to see if the NCOA system is something that we can use in Georgia. Also, let me say this. I'm going in February to the National Association of Secretary of State's meeting to meet with a group of people that are going to go to Congress to ask them to modify motor voter so that it can be easier to clean up the voter rolls. Now, I really believe that motor voter overall is a good program, but it's certainly not a perfect program. And I think that one of the problems with it is that it is too hard for registrars and election officials on the local level, the county level, to weed out the people that are simply not living there anymore or that are not participating in the process. And I believe that that's one of the areas of motor voter that we have to fix so that we can have a better and more accurate voter list in Georgia. Yes, ma'am. Well, voter fraud is a problem that's not been created by motor voter. Voter fraud, where it does occur in pockets of Georgia, the cases that we're working on now have nothing to do with motor voter. In fact, we have been undertaking the most extensive investigation of voter fraud in the history of Georgia in Dodge County. And if you don't believe me, just ask the people in Dodge County. Certainly will. But again, from what I've seen, I'm not sure that the voter fraud problems that we're investigating now would have been any different if motor voter had not been passed. But we certainly will take a look at that to see and try to correct those problems if they exist.
Great to believe my real question is, why is it that after the Coleman report in the 60s and Chubb report in the 90s, we still think that we can get better education by paying teachers more? The research does not support that in any way.
Well, I haven't read either one of those reports, and so I can't, give you a very educated comment on those reports. I do believe, though, that in general that we have to pay teachers what they're worth, and I think for a long time in Georgia we have not done that, and I think that we are on the road to doing that. I don't think it's a panacea. It's certainly not going to solve all the problems that we have, but I think that we all agree that we need good qualified teachers and we need to pay them a competitive salary, which we have just now gotten to the point of doing in Georgia.
You mentioned that your office is in charge of occupational licensing for many different occupations. Do you have any plans, looking back, a lot of these licensing requirements haven't been reviewed in many, many years and may not be necessary anymore. Do you have any plans to review those?
We certainly do. In fact, we have written, Cathy and I were discussing this last week, we have written to Joe Tanner, who of course leads the Governor's Commission on Privatization, to ask them to suggest any boards that we have that can be either eliminated or privatized. We currently have 36 boards that regulate 70 professions, and that's more than most other states around us, and so I believe that there is room for reform in that area. Now keep in mind that if we go this route, and I think that we will in the near future, perhaps this session, we have to try, in my opinion, to do it as a package, because as Senator Edge here can tell you, what happens is if you recommend doing away with a professional board, let's say it's just one, then a state legislator or senator is going to get 200 phone calls, and 199 of those are going to be from the profession that they're trying to eliminate, and one's going to be from somebody that just happened to read in the newspaper that this was up for debate and thinks it's a good idea. So how do you think that the senator or representative is going to vote? And the point is that it's going to be very difficult, unless we can do it as an overall reform package, to eliminate some of these boards, because these professions have been regulated, some of them for years and years, and they're very protective of their turf. And so instead of just proposing something and having it die in the General Assembly, I would like to do something that's actually going to pass and be implemented, and to do that, I think we're going to have to do it as a package. Yes, sir.
Would you support Mr. Massey legislation that would require people to show some form of identification before they could vote?
I certainly would. That's been talked a lot about during the campaign. I want to make sure you understand one thing, and that is that 32 states now do not require IDs. That was not what our opposition in the election said on a number of occasions, but the truth is 32 states in this country do not require IDs. Now, having said that, I have no problem with requiring IDs. I think you have to be sure of a couple things. One is that you have to be sure it's going to pass the Justice Department. If you're really serious about getting it done, if you want it just to be rhetoric, then you can put a bill in and have it passed, and the Justice Department is going to throw it out. They've done it in 3 other southern states in the last 3 years. If you really want a bill that works, you're going to have 8 or 9 different options for IDs. It can't just be just a picture ID, or I can guarantee you it's not going to pass the Justice Department. Secondly, we have to consider, I think, in any voter reform, is it worth it for the longer wait that it's going to entail? I know here in Cobb County we got some calls on Election Day that it was a 2.5-hour wait in some polling places. Now, most people, thankfully, are willing to wait that long. But I think we have to always consider in any reform, is it worth it to increase the time that it's going to take people to vote? There's no question that showing IDs is going to increase it some. How much? Nobody knows. But I think in this case it probably is worth it to ensure that people are who they say they are, and I would support that, and we're looking at that right now at some of the other states that have done that have gotten approval from the Justice Department. Hey, Tim.
Secretary Massey, most politicians, when they're in an elected office, would say they have no specific ambition beyond this particular office. I said that because I don't want you to answer that way to this one, but I don't know anybody in politics who thinks that you're going to be satisfied with Secretary of State
think we're about out of time, actually. That's a tough question, Tim. I know you didn't want me to answer this way, but let me just say that the only thing that I'm focused on right now, honestly, is trying to be a good Secretary of State. I believe that in only 11 months we have made a lot of positive changes, and I think that in the next 2 years we can continue to do that. Being as honest as I can, I enjoy public service. I also want to wait and see what the effect of my service is going to be on our family. As I mentioned to you, my children are 6 and 4, and it's not easy. It's not easy at all to balance those. I guess it's not easy in any profession, but I think it's especially hard in public life. And so I'm going to be trying to be a good Secretary of State and see where the good Lord leads me after that. I know that was not the answer you wanted, but that's the way I feel about it. Any other questions? I want to also acknowledge Tom Thrash in the back, which I should have done earlier. Tom and I have been friends for a long, long time, and he is on his way to being a federal judge, and we're happy about that. And Tom, appreciate you being here as well. Thank you for the chance to be here.